First off, I want to thank the grace of heaven and the virtues of the masters, the mercy of the grand predecessor, transmitting masters, lecturers, and everyone here today for the opportunity to talk about this topic here, enlighten the mind and behold the essence. I guess if you know Chinese, you can guess that's translates to明心见性. Okay, but anyways. So I mean, this is kind of like you can say it's the goal. It's like a goal. It's what we're trying to achieve. I mean, we want to achieve Buddhahood, but to get to Buddhahood, this is what we have to do. Okay, so this is kind of it's another. Yeah, I mean, Buddhahood is talking about like ultimate, nirvana, the anuttara samyak sambodhi. But so we have to do this though, to enlighten our mind, and once we can enlighten our mind, then we can behold the essence, our true nature, the true nature, okay, Buddha nature. And so everything that we talk about, cultivation, it's all about this, really. And so it's maybe talked about in different ways, but, or, talk about different methods of cultivation to achieve this. Right, so part of this will be, you can say, kind of a review of some of the stuff that you've already heard, at least recently as well. All right. Okay, so now Holy Teacher says the vast ocean of people, sunrise and sunset. How many people have lost themselves due to not knowing and being unaware? How many people are drifting among the sights and sounds, of the world? How many people have sold out or betrayed themselves? Life, this world that we live in, is full of, there's over 7 billion people, and then, countless other sentient beings, animals, etc. But in terms of people, we're still, we go about our lives kind of unaware of really what life, what's the true meaning of life. And so actually, when we started this online classes a little over a year ago, right, the first topic was the meaning of life. Okay, so basically we have to, if we're going to start anywhere, that's where we would start, to understand the meaning of life. Okay, so that's why, for those who are just joining us after the beginning, I recommend going back and to the beginning and going through, because there's kind of like a progression of topics that we really kind of build up a foundation for us. Okay, so it's very important. So definitely understanding what life is about. Why are we here? Okay, but most people are kind of ignorant of that or unaware of that. Really, what's the true meaning? Why we are here? What are we doing here? People that kind of lost themselves in pursuit of the material things, the things in the world, the pursuit of happiness, but like pleasures, pleasures of the senses, all that kind of stuff, which people might think is normal or is seems like the right thing to do for them, but little. So that's why they're unenlightened. They're not enlightened. So that's why. There's only one Buddha, right? One Buddha person who's become awakened and enlightened, become a Buddha in this in our history, right? He saw things differently. Okay, so so we're people are just pursuing all the sights and sounds, the stuff in the world. Okay, so according to, from the Buddha's perspective, they've betrayed themselves. They sold out themselves or sometimes we say, oh, you sold your soul to the devil, right? So it's basically like that, but without really knowing it, okay? And so we betrayed ourselves in thinking that, oh, this is the way to live, okay? But this is the ignorance, okay? It's basically boils down to ignorance and delusion, right? So it's so basically we've done this. People have done sold themselves out or betrayed themselves. Now it's for the sake of life, right? Living, striving for fame and fortune for the sake of wealth. How many people have buried or stifled themselves? How many people have lost themselves? How can Holy Teacher not be sad? So Holy Teacher, obviously being a Buddha, an enlightened being, they see that it's very sad, because they have, there's no self for them. I mean, it's all about trying to help others, benefit others, and and so they're not selfish, and so they obviously they are sad when they see other sentient beings. They see sentient beings, lost and not enlightened. They would rather see that everyone become a Buddha, become enlightened. Okay, so so it's, again, striving for the things that really are very temporary, have no lasting value. Okay, so there are a lot of famous people who, they made a fortune, but they died, early, and even if they die, a full life, but still, in the end, it's all for naught. Okay, so we should realize that and not, try to pursue, at least not to the, that extent. Okay, so because disciples' hearts are like, are like a free-floating kite without the string. We're just literally, it says where the string broke. Okay, so it's like a kite that's being caught in the wind, and it's just floating away in the wind, floating indefinitely or aimlessly. When can one reach the shore of enlightenment? That is, okay. So, or shore of awakening. When can one become truly enlightened? Right? When can one truly know oneself? Right? Or to truly understand oneself? I think most people will not, don't really know themselves. I mean, they think, people think that they know themselves well and probably know themselves better than other people know them, but not necessarily. I mean, other people might actually know them better, but because, again, we don't necessarily see or want to see all the things about ourselves or understand all the things about ourselves, right? It's kind of like a selective, we can become very selective in what we choose to see in ourselves. Okay, so, but really we have to know who we really are, which is, we're talking about our true self, our true nature, or the Buddha nature, our true essence. Okay, so we may kind of know our false self, right? This body, this ego, right? This personality, but that's the false self. Okay, but that's not really the true self. So we really also need to know the true self. All right. Okay. So let's see. Yeah. Okay. So basically, the明心见性, right? So it's kind of like the two parts, right? The first part is to enlighten the mind. Once we've enlightened the mind or truly understand and awaken the mind, and then we can behold the essence, like the true essence. Again, the essence is kind of, it's intangible, and so it's hard to really kind of get a grasp on what it is. Okay, we can't really describe it, but once we have an enlightened mind, then we can really behold the essence. We can really kind of get it. Okay. So the first step really is to know and to understand the heart and mind, basically the mind of sentient beings the human mind, the typical human mind, right? This is the who we are, how we are, typically, okay, not the enlightened person, okay? So, and then, knowing that, then we can kind of enlighten our mind, okay? Or you can say awaken, okay? Or become enlightened, okay? So, to know, so basically to know and to be in accord with the true mind. You can say like the bodhicitta or the bodhi mind, the mind of the Buddha, the mind of the Buddha nature. Okay, so this we would call like the true mind as well, or maybe the Tao mind. But yeah, so this is not the human mind of duality. Okay, so you can say this is also the mind of non-duality. So that's we've talked about that last week, and I guess maybe the week before. So that's one of the things we have to do is to get rid of the duality, the mindset of duality, and then get to the non-duality, which will get us closer to this true the Bodhi mind. Okay, and right. So and what when we can do that, then we will avoid karma. We will avoid creating karma. Right? Just like what we were talking about last week. Right? We won't be confused about karma. Right? We will understand karma or causality, and therefore we will also, well, not just understand, I mean, yeah, I think we all kind of get the principle, kind of understand, but, actually put it into practice. I mean, to actually do the things that, so that we don't create karma, right? And just like we talked about last week about not, even though we may have planted the seeds of karma in the past, that we do not give rise to the affinities or the conditions that to allow those karmic seeds to mature. Okay, so this is all very important. Okay, in doing that, to achieving that, right? And then so once we can get to that kind of be awakened, enlightened, then we can behold the essence. Okay, so this in essence to really be one with the Buddha nature. Okay, now this is something that maybe we cannot in human terms kind of describe, but what Sixth Patriarch, when he finally got enlightened, right, by the Fifth Patriarch, right, so he says, right, how amazing that this, what he calls it, self-nature or the true nature, Buddha nature, is originally pure, right? How amazing that the self-nature is unborn and undying. Okay, so it's eternal. It's eternal, and it's basically it doesn't change, and it's pure, so it's never defiled or tainted. Okay. It's not influenced by anything. Okay, so and how amazing that the self-nature is inherently complete, and so this essence, this true nature, is all Buddha nature is also, there's nothing that it lacks, right? So if there's nothing that it lacks, you can infer from that the whole universe is contained within it. Okay, and how amazing that is. Self-nature neither moves nor stays. So you can say that, yeah, if it contains everything, then there's nowhere for it to go, right? Well, the moves or stays also, you can say it's the stillness and motion. It's hard to say. It's not one or the other. It's whatever. But no. So how amazing that all dharmas come from the self-nature too. Okay, so. All dharmas in this case, you can say all phenomena, okay, all phenomena as well. So yeah, it is true. Now, actually, scientists, or physicists, they are kind of wondering whether this universe is actually comes from our consciousness. Okay, and in fact, you can say that there are two questions. One is, that they're kind of asking, does this universe come up? Does it only exist in our consciousness? And secondly, how does consciousness arise from matter? Actually, this would be the first question. Actually, so the the universe is all these forms, right, of matter. How does that give rise to consciousness? So there's a question there, and that's so far they can't explain how that could be. Okay, so but anyways, that other question of saying, maybe it's our consciousness that this whole reality, this universe, exists only within our consciousness, which is interesting. That's very close to what the Buddha would say, that this, because our Buddha nature, basically this whole reality is within our Buddha nature. Okay, all right, but okay, so now Lecture Liu, he's saying, to enlighten the mind, right? Basically, we have to get to the root. Okay, grasp the root. The root. What's the root? The root is this essence, the Buddha nature. Okay, so we have to use the eternal, unchanging Buddha nature essence to cultivate, right, and to become. So we cannot use our human way of. Well, we're going to use the human way, but not the typical way or the unenlightened way of cultivating. Okay, we can't do that, right? Right? Cultivation, after all, it's to rectify and to refine our heart and mind. So you can say that the root of the problem is in the mind. Okay, is the heart and mind. All right. We have to get rid of the mentality or the mind or attitude of sentient beings, right? Sentient beings, we are all sentient beings unless we are enlightened Buddhas. Okay, so and sentient beings are really, for the most part, they are for self-benefit. Right? They for self-benefit, self-pleasure, all that kind of stuff. You could say this is selfish. Okay, so there's the self, all right, that false self. All right, so if we can grab hold of our essence, the root, then naturally we will be able to get rid of bad temper, right? So we say in cultivation, right, we try to get rid of bad temper and correct our faults, deficiencies. But if we keep doing the things that kind of a sentient being does, then that basically we won't be able to do that. Okay, so we have to understand and kind of do things according to that Buddha nature, right? Okay. Okay, so this, you've probably seen this in some other context. It says, careful of our thoughts, for they can become our actions. Careful of our actions, for they can become our habits. Careful of our habits, for they will shape our character. Careful of our character, for it will define our destiny. Actually, you've probably also seen it where there's an extra step there between the thoughts and actions, where thoughts turn into words and then words into actions. Okay, but same idea. Basically, so again, this is kind of like the chain of events, the linkage from our thoughts, right? Everything originate from our thoughts, and that's what we've been saying all along, right? A thought can plant a karmic seed, right? And once you have a karmic seed, that can potentially lead to, reincarnation, okay, and the karmic retribution, perhaps, okay, or it could be a karmic reward, but the karmic result, okay. So everything starts from that thought, which plants the karmic seed, right? And so anything we do, starts in the mind, right? So that's what we've talked about over the past And so this is something that we should be very clear on, okay? That it's, even our habits, right? Habits, even though they are you can say they're unconscious, right? Subconscious, unconscious habits. But again, they originated in the mind still. Okay, it's not like completely like muscle memory type of habit. Okay, where it's just completely from the muscle, but it had its start. That habit had its beginnings in the mind. Okay, so that's kind of, we have to get to the root of the problem, and that's where it is. So that's why in cultivation we say we have to cultivate the heart and mind, right? That's what we are cultivating. Okay, trying to correct that. All right. Let's see. All right. So now we want to understand the mind. Then the human mind, the human psyche here. Okay. So this is basically, you can say that our human psyche is kind of divided into three parts, or three. I mean, these are, three parts, but you can say like three aspects maybe. Okay. So at the lowest level, the lowest level would be what we call the kind of the flesh, heart, and mind. Okay, so this is basically you can say it's the animalistic heart and mind, because animals basically, it's if you look at it, how animal their heart and mind is basically, it's this. Okay, so humans have that too. It's that aspect, which is, kind of, you have very basic emotions, like fear, anger, sadness, happiness, surprise, disgust, maybe. Okay, so there's, these basic stuff that, even, animals have. I don't know if they have all those emotions, but perhaps, yeah. It's basically what this mind does is, or this aspect of the mind does, is to satisfy the senses, right? Survival, you can say. So in psychology, standard, well, this is, I guess, Freudian psychology, right? They divide into very similar, actually. The id, which is really, about the materialistic self, the survival and basic instincts and desires. Okay, and that's pretty much the same thing that we're talking about here. So obviously, when you talk about this, then animals have this characteristic too. Okay, so that's why we say it's animalistic. So it's like the animal within us. Okay, if we kind of if we don't control ourselves, right? If the ego and superego don't, well, it's really the ego really. It isn't under control, then this thing takes over. This id, or this flesh, heart, and mind takes over, and it's basic. There was I don't know if this is used in school, in, I guess, school anymore, but used to, we read this novel called it's by William Golding. Sheesh, what was the title of that? Gosh, okay, mine's coming up with a blank right now. But it's basically where, kids, the book is about, it's basically how people, in that instance, is talking about kids. Okay, kids, they're on a plane, they crash, land on this deserted island. They're all by themselves, and so what happens? And it's really about psychology. It's about the ego, superego, and how they then devolve, basically, or at least some of them, they devolved into basically like following the id. Okay, so it's very basic stuff. And then there's another group. They kind of like two groups. The other group is kind of more following the superego kind of thing. So that's so that's how humans are. Okay, so anyway, so the second one, the human heart and mind, that's kind of, you can say, the rational self. Although emotions can come from here too. So not necessarily, it's not always rational, but there's rationality where we can think and reason. Right? There's some of the higher emotions, maybe. You have envy, greed, lust, love, hate. Perhaps. Maybe those are a little bit higher emotions. You might have sense of righteousness or propriety come, as part of this aspect of the mind. And then there's you can also have delusion and ignorance. Okay, so this is what's typically called the ego, right? The ego, which kind of mediates between the conscious and subconscious minds. Okay, so typically this is like the conscious mind. Okay, when we're talking about the conscious mind, the flesh, heart, mind, or the id, and actually the superego tend to be like in the subconscious. Okay, oh yeah, that's right. Thanks. It's that book is The Lord of the Flies. Okay, by William Golding. Okay, so but that's it's really it's about psychology really. Okay, so so and this is also what gives us the sense of identity and personality, right? So this is typically, yeah, I mean, we are operating here. I mean, this is the part that we are more familiar with because this is like in the conscious mind, and this is the one that's we are using most of the time consciously. Of course, the other ones kind of come in too into play, but usually from a subconsciously. All right. So yeah. So even like maybe habits, they kind of fall into maybe the id, but yeah, it's different ways how you might want to kind of divide things up. But okay. So and then the highest level you can say is what we call the Tao mind or Tao heart mind. Okay, so this is, you can say it's our conscience, right? The morality, we have sense of morality and ethics, sense of guilt and shame, where wisdom, compassion, faith and sincerity. Okay, so that you can say that's where it's coming from. Okay, so this is kind of, so once we have to understand this in order to kind of realize that, oh, really, our mind is, it's not exactly that simple. Okay, there's, you can say it can be a little bit more complicated. And once we realize that, oh, okay, so we need to be under control. So basically, like when we're practicing, precepts and whatnot, or the proprieties, things like that, it's all in the middle part, right? This human heart mind, the typical heart mind that we're using there. And then so sometimes we fall back, we kind of try to get the Tao heart mind, I guess, that the super ego, right, gets involved to try to help us in what we're keep us on the good, so to speak. Okay. Actually, there's also another book which is interesting. This kind of talks, which is also, you can say, talking about these various aspects of the mind, and that's Journey to the West. Okay, so that's the Chinese story, a book, I guess, novel that was written, and because the main characters, right, the main character being the monk, okay, Tang Seng, okay, so he represents the superego or this Tao heart mind, okay. So it's all good. It's all compassion. It's all that stuff. And then you have the Monkey King, Sun Wukong. Okay, so he represents this human heart mind because it can do. Sometimes he's good. Sometimes he kind of basically he can go on either way. Okay, so sometimes he kind of behaves. Other times he doesn't. So that's typical human. And then there's that Zuba Jie, who's I don't know, if you see it, it's like he's like the pig character, okay? So, and he's more basically this flesh, heart, mind, okay? So it's basically all about pleasure or whatever, just for himself. Everything is for himself, okay? So that's also another interesting. I mean, Journey to the West, it's yeah, you could say it's kind of like also fantasy. I mean, but it's also a good read. I mean, it's much longer than The Lord of the Flies. It's kind of short, but this Journey to the West is also I recommend, if you have a chance to read it, it's good, especially if you kind of understand what these characters are or what they represent. Okay, all right, so now human consciousness, right, is defined by our sensory awareness, cognition, self-awareness. By the way, I think there are at least a couple of psychology majors in our class. So maybe if I make any mistakes, you can correct me. But anyways, sensory awareness. Okay, so for the most part, we talked about this in the past couple of weeks, how we rely on our senses so much, right? Especially those five. Well, okay, it's really six, but 5 senses, right? The sensory perception of the 5 senses: sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. Okay, so this is in Buddhism, or in the Tao, we talk about the 5 sense consciousness. Okay, so those are they consider them to have their own consciousness, or they are aspects of the mind consciousness. Okay, so and so this is like the big part of. I mean, if you can imagine, if we are born without any of these senses, I mean, we only have our mind. Okay, then how do we perceive the world? How do we perceive? It's hard to imagine that, right? I mean, basically, we can only just imagine things. Okay, so but who knows what we could imagine if we have no experience with any of these other senses. Okay, so that's kind of hard to imagine. Now, then there's also cognition, or thinking. So thinking and reasoning, right? So this French philosopher, mathematician René Descartes, I guess he's about 500 years ago, says, "I think, therefore I am," which, okay, that's very interesting, because then he's there's showing self-awareness here when we say this. I think, therefore I am. Okay, so this self-awareness, of course, is awareness of the consciousness, the conscious mind, right? The conscious mind. So it's not necessarily aware of the Buddha nature, our true essence, our true self. Okay, so again, this is still within the consciousness. Now, can we have, like an AI, computer AI, that can also come up with this? I think, therefore I am. I mean, can it also be self-aware in this sense? I'm not sure. I mean, an AI can learn to do things, but I'm not sure it can be really self-aware. I mean, obviously there's some, science fiction stories and movies, made of that talk about, how they are self-aware. But I'm not so sure. Okay, but definitely not aware of like a soul, or the Buddha nature. Okay, now, this is where, so in Buddhism, right, it talks about the 5 sense consciousnesses, and then also the mind, is what would be normally they would call the 6th sense, but also there's also a 7th consciousness. So the 6th and 7th consciousness are involved here in the thinking and reasoning, and then you can say, besides this consciousness, right, then we have the subconsciousness, or the subconscious. Okay, so this is where typically we talk about the 6, in the normal language, we say 6th sense, right, where it's not part of these first 5. but this is also not the how in Buddhism they talk about sixth sense, okay, the mind sense. So this is like that extra sensory perception, right? The ESP, right? Where there's something else going on, and this tends to come from our subconscious because it's not in our conscious awareness, right? It comes about, right? And then so in psychology also, this is from Carl Jung's his theories, talks about a collective unconscious. Collective unconscious is really it's kind of like a not subjective or maybe not personal, and it's inherited. It's like the inherited instincts and ancestral experience, which is interesting because that sounds kind of like the eighth consciousness. Okay, so basically where it's the storehouse of all the things we done previously, and well, although this one would say it's kind of shared, it's collective, so shared among all beings, all humans, okay, and so, but so when we talk about in the Buddhism, talk about the alaya or the eighth consciousness, that is where again what we talk about planting the karmic seeds. Okay, that's where they are. And that's, of course, that gets used by our sixth and seventh consciousness, okay? Because it's like, you can say it's a memory, okay? So it's, the conscious mind will use the memories there, even though those are like in the subconscious, okay? And then there's actually a ninth consciousness, which is is above this one, and then that is actually the pure consciousness. Okay, so that's completely pure. It's undefiled by anything uninfluenced. Okay, so this is all part of the Buddha nature. Okay, so now is it okay? So actually this so I think they're right. All right, the thinking and reasoning. Yeah, animals may not have this. Okay, so but animals, in terms of self-awareness. They may not think the way we do. I mean, they may have some kind of thinking. We're not too clear about that, but I mean, they probably do have some level of thinking, depending on the animal, of course. Now, the self-awareness, but some animals do. They can at least recognize themselves in a mirror. All right, they can recognize that that's who they're looking at is not another animal but themselves. And I believe it's like, some of the primates, maybe some apes, or dolphins, and maybe elephants. And there might be others, but they can kind of recognize that what they're looking at in the mirror is not another animal, but themselves. So that's kind of interesting. But again, humans are the more, you can obviously at a higher level, so a more advanced, if you will. And we're able to recognize and be really aware. Okay, so all right, so we kind of understand this. Now the thing is, because we rely so much on our senses, and we talk about this all the time, the five skandhas. That's the senses is that first one, the form, which is the sense organs and the objects of those senses. Okay, so and typically for the five senses, those would be typically external, but we're talking about also including the mind sense. Okay, so that would be also the things that are just in the mind. But okay, so the form and then sensation. So that's the whatever interaction there is between the sense organs and the objects. It comes up. We get some kind of sensation. Okay, so we feel. All right, we feel something. And then after that, then we have a conception or an idea of what that is, okay, of what it is, that sensation is. And then the next higher level is that then we can differentiate and discriminate between them. And, so getting to here at this, so this is, conception is where we identify things, and differentiation, then we start maybe discriminating, or then we have maybe bias is applied here, and we have like and dislike, okay? And finally, the intention of what we're going to do based on that. So again, this chain reaction, this is really what, if we want to understand how we are, our mind, heart and mind, then we have to understand this, that this is the process, the sequence that we go through, and that this is really what defines us. We look at reality through this lens, so to speak, okay? This lens. This is how we look at the world, is through this. This is how we, how we see the world, how we relate to the world, and not just the world, to ourselves too, okay? So this is kind of, then we use this also to kind of define ourselves. Okay, so six senses, right? The mental formations, you can have thoughts, ideas, views, intentions, emotions, attachments, desires, greed, anger, delusion, ignorance, ego. Okay, so all these things, right? Three poisons, attachments, desires. Okay, so these are all things basically they're all in the mind. Okay. Now this ego here that we talk about is, you can say it's a subset of that other ego. Okay, so this is just kind of like the self-identity part. Which is where we have, our preferences, biases, idiosyncrasies. These are the little things that make us kind of different, I guess, from other people, like unique, so to speak. Our personality, where we typically talk about, personality is here. And so this is really, again, this is the false self. This is based on our interactions with the world and how we see the world and see ourselves in it, that we created this self-identity, this false self. Partly is, sure, when we're born, our parents gave us a name. Okay, so obviously we didn't come up with that name ourselves, but we're given that name, and then we assume that name. I mean, we are, and we assume that that's who we are, and then all the other stuff, though, that eventually becomes kind of like our character and personality is from our own doing, from our own experiences. Okay, so this is very, again, also a very important thing that we have to understand. And really, if we want to we have to kind of make some changes, so to speak, at basically at this level. Certainly if we can catch it before the intention, right? Because by the time we have intention, we already have some kind of attachment, desires. Okay, differentiation. This is where we have potentially that duality, the mindset of duality. So we have to kind of get to it before this. So maybe between conception and differentiation. Ideally, also conception, sometimes, it's not wrong to identify, say, oh, this is what this is, this is giving me this sense. It's just that we shouldn't be attached to those. Those are all forms, okay, but, we shouldn't be too attached to it. But basically, before differentiation, that's where we try to, we have to make a change so that we don't get into this differentiation and intention. Okay, if we want to break that cycle of karma, right? So that's what last week we said, don't create the mind of duality. Okay, so that's here. Okay, yeah. Okay, so the Tao. Okay, so all right, so this is kind of like merging those two things together. So we have the Tao heart mind, which is basically like the superego. So that's the Alaya 8th, and also the Amala, which is the 9th consciousness, is kind of, you can say, at that level. So that's the highest level. This is part of, you can say, the Buddha nature. Then the next level down, we have the typical human heart mind, ego, which is the mind sense, the 6th and 7th consciousness, right? Where we have conception, differentiation, and intention. Okay, so or this is where I put these. Okay, so and then flesh, the flesh, heart, and mind, which is that lowest level, the id, corresponding to the id, which we have the five sense consciousness. Okay, where we have form and cessation. Okay, so. Yeah, right. Okay, so this is kind of just the view of the whole thing. Okay, so now so we understand this now. So why? So the Buddha talked about how do we deal with this? Okay, this mind. Okay, so so he talks about the Four Noble Truths. So we have to understand these. Again, this is basically review. Okay, we've talked about these before. This is coming from the Dharmakakra Pravartana Sutra, which is basically the setting in motion of the wheel of Dharma. Okay, so this is Buddha's first sermon, basically, to his first teachings, right? So to his fellow, cultivators. So this is, again, we have to understand this, right? These Four Noble Truths, right? That the first one, the existence of suffering, there is the existence of suffering, right? Because our existence, physical existence, is imperfect and it's impermanent, right? So, and you can say it's unsatisfactory because, again, it's impermanent and it's imperfect. Okay, so the second one being that there is a cause of suffering. Okay, so, and that comes from attachments and desires. Okay, and basically you create karma and that causes suffering. Whether in this life or in a future life, all right, and then that there is the suffering can end because you have a cause, and you can also, you can create the suffering, right? Basically, you can create the suffering out of nothing, essentially, and so you can end it too. Okay, so the cessation of suffering. So we started it, therefore we ended it. We can end it, right? So that's. A holy teacher, talked about that when in the class we talked about a couple of weeks ago. Whoever started it, whoever has to end it. Right? So definitely we started it. Our karma is self-caused. Okay, so therefore we have to end it ourselves. So even the Buddhas cannot end our karma, end our suffering directly. Okay, they can only kind of guide us, teach us, point us in the right direction, but we have to do it, right? So the path, and then there is a way to end, leads to the end of suffering, the cessation of suffering. Okay, and so Buddha says, talks about that as the Noble Eightfold Path, right? So, let's see. Right, so in this sutra, so Buddha says, I call these the Four Noble Truths, dharmas that have never been heard before and which are to be contemplated, right? And sure enough, in this world, in our history, he's the first who talked about this, right? So the Four Noble Truths, the first Noble Truth, right? Existence, suffering, right? Birth, old age, sickness, and death are suffering, right? So these are four of the major sufferings. And then you can say emotions like, sadness, anger, jealousy, worry, anxiety, fear, despair are also suffering, right? Separation from loved ones is also suffering. Association with those you hate is suffering, right? A desire, attachment, clinging to the five skandhas, is suffering. So those are, the 8 sufferings. You hear that when in the Dharma class topic of what is it? Not the person. Is that's not the meaning of life? The meaning of life. Okay, so and then the second noble truth, right, is the origin of suffering because of ignorance. Right, people cannot see the truth about life, and they become caught in the flames of desire, anger, jealousy, grief, worry, fear, and despair. It is the craving that leads to re-becoming or rebirth, accompanied by enjoyment and lust, enjoying this and that. In other words, craving for sensual desires, craving for becoming or being, craving for disbecoming or non-being. Okay, so it's all sorts of craving, desires, attachments, right? That lead to that's the cause of suffering. So, okay, so, and then the third is the cessation. All right, so it's the remainderless, or, like leaving no trace, fading and ceasing, giving up, relinquishing, letting go, and rejecting of that same craving. So that's why Buddha says we have to kind of get rid of our desires. And, desires, I guess, can lead to attachments. Okay, so those things. So if we can get rid of that, then we can end the suffering. And the fourth noble truth is the way leading to. It's simply the noble eightfold path. Okay, so again, this is a review. You've heard this before, but we have to keep reviewing these. So make sure that we know that we always we can always recall it in our mind. It's like, oh yeah, this is the reason why we suffer. Is it's our desires. So kind of remind ourselves that yes, we need to cut down on our desires. Okay, so the noble eightfold paths is the right view or understanding, the right intention or thoughts, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Right, so this is the middle. This is what Buddha calls the middle way. Right, it avoids both extremes. Right, and okay, so. He says, this is the Buddha has followed the middle way and realized understanding, liberation, and peace. Okay, so so basically, no extremes, right? You don't do extremes. So like, you're talking about, can we make more money? Right, definitely don't go to extremes. Obviously, we can make more. We can we can make more money. Maybe if we need a bigger house, we can get a bigger house. Things like that. But don't go too far, and don't get caught up in that. In other words, as well, not just to extreme, but don't get caught up in it. Right? That then we forget what our purpose is, and this becomes our main pursuit. Okay, so that shouldn't be it. Right? And what is the right path? Okay, it's the right path because it does not avoid or deny suffering, but it allows for a direct confrontation with suffering as a means to overcome it. So realizing what suffering is and where it's coming from, then we can do something about it. Right, so the Noble Eightfold Path is the path of living in awareness. Mindfulness is the foundation. Right, by practicing mindfulness, you can develop concentration, which enables you to attain understanding. By way of right concentration, you realize right awareness, thoughts, speech, action, livelihood, and effort. Okay. The understanding that develops can liberate you from every shackle of suffering and give birth to true peace and joy. Okay, so these are the words of the Buddha. Okay, so so we use prajna wisdom for right view and so basically you can kind of divide this up. The first two we use our wisdom, the prajna wisdom, okay, for the right view and right intention, and we use precepts, right? Precepts. So that's why precepts are also very important in the practice and the cultivation. Applies to these middle three: our speech, action, and livelihood, and then. Also concentration, okay, so or samadhi at the highest level, but concentration applying to the last three, our right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Okay, so this is those three, and you can say that those three also, in Chinese is 戒定慧, or it's not in that order, but that also overcome or address, the three poisons. Okay, so greed, anger, and delusion. Okay, all right. So anyway, so this is you can say this is Buddha's prescription for if you follow this kind of path, the Eightfold Path, that then we can get to the end of the cessation. The end of the suffering, okay, or the way out of the suffering, okay. Obviously, we need to receive the Tao, okay, so we have to get the three treasures, receive that transmission, okay, in order, that's like a basic requirement, I guess, and then plus all this other cultivation. Okay. All right. So now we kind of understand. Okay, the mind, and we need to get to. Now we want to enlighten the mind, right? So just like Buddha says, we want to avoid the path of extremes. Okay, so Buddha says, one who is on the path should avoid these two extremes. What two? The pursuit of sensual pleasure, which is inferior, vulgar, low, ignoble. Okay, and the pursuit of deprivation, which is painful and ignoble. So so Buddha, he tried both. I mean, he was born into royalty, so as a prince, therefore, he knew the pursuit of pleasure, sensual pleasure in the palace. But afterwards, when he left the palace and he gave up his you can say claim to the throne, and become a cultivator, right? He went to the other extreme, which is deprivation, right? Living on a sesame seed a day, and the very type of harsh ascetic cultivation, right? But so it's interesting. I mean, he tried both, and he realized that neither is the right way to transcend, to end the suffering. And so they both lead to failure. Avoiding both of these extremes, the Tathagata, that's the Buddha, has awakened to the middle way, right, which has the capacity to lead one to understanding, liberation, and peace, right? So, and then that gives rise to the vision, which gives rise to knowledge, which leads to peace, to direct knowledge or noumenon, to enlightenment, and to ultimately to nirvana. Okay, so that's So it's a whole process, right, to get there. But we start by working on our heart and mind. Okay, so we basically want to avoid the mindset of duality and subjectivity, right? I think it's we are very very subjective. I mean, in some senses, sometimes we can be objective, okay, but probably we are not. Well, I mean, we're definitely not objective all the time. I think we are probably spend more of our time being subjective, okay, which means that's where we have our personal bias getting into it, okay. And okay, so we want to get, you can say one of the extremes is infatuation or obsession. This is like, oh, no, I have to have it. I'll do anything to get it, or do anything to hold on to it, right? That's very extreme. Okay, so so obviously we should not get to that extreme. And there's also stubbornness and attachments. Okay, so these are lesser degrees, I guess. That then you get comparisons. That's part of the mindset of duality. It's like comparing, right? Subject object duality. You have comparison. Then I compare me to you, or I compare to other people. I mean, comparisons are something that we really should not do. Okay. This leads to like and dislike, right and wrong. Also envy, right? That can come from comparisons as well. So generally, we should not compare. We should just be, you can say, content. I mean, there's no reason to do comparisons. It's just, it doesn't matter what other people have compared to me. It doesn't matter, really. I mean, we shouldn't. Maybe it's because of what society tells us. It's kind of pressure from society that this is the way they do things, and we have to compare and make these comparisons. And we don't compare well to someone else, then we have to strive to try to achieve the things that they've got. Oh, the bigger house, they have the big car, or whatever. Then that leads to discontent. Okay, so and envy, right? So there's that's suffering too, I guess. Right? So, and then also so desires, greed, arrogance. Okay, so these can also arise, I guess, from comparisons, not necessarily, but arrogance. Say, hey, hey, look, no one else has no one's as rich as me, no one's as, whatever. So that can also lead to arrogance or whatever. No one knows as much as I do. All this. So again, it's all comparison, and also then then the bias and prejudices. Okay, so these are all the mindset of duality and subjectivity that we need to kind of address. We have to get rid of these. Okay, comparisons. There's it's not like, I don't know, absolute. Okay, so again, we have to be careful that what we're saying is we don't do compare. We do need to compare things sometimes. But as long as it's objective, okay, the comparison is objective, then that's maybe we have to compare two things, but it should not become subjective or for other means. Okay, all right. And then, okay, so of course we talked about these two as well. The no attachment, I think this was last week we talked about. Okay, so non-attachment. So again, so this is where, especially like the four images, because then this is where we have subject-object duality, right? The four images being of self, others, sentient beings, and our lifespan. You can say personality or whatever. That's who we think, this is my life. Okay, so we have to kind of let go of these things. Okay, and then also the three minds. Okay, the past, present, and future mind. Okay, so again, this is all review. Okay, so we've all talked about this in the past, many times, and so the attachments, basically the grasping, the clinging, the desire, three poisons. Okay, so these things we got to get rid of this. All right, if we want to enlighten the mind, then we have to, the heart and mind, then we have to get rid of these things, and then do things with the true. This is you can say the no intention, or is the true intention. Okay, the wu wei. All right, so everyone's familiar with this. Again, so it's the untainted by subjectivity, right, or emotion, or preference, or ego, right? So that's why we say it comes like directly from the Buddha nature, the spontaneity. Okay, right, and the fifth patriarch. Well, he told, I think he told the sixth patriarch. Says, right, the mind should cling to nothing when it acts. Okay, so. This is, you can say it's this. Okay, so there's no, it's basically wu wei. Okay, so and there's no attachment to it. Okay, so this is basically, so that's again, this is review. Okay, and then also sui yan, which also goes with this, and this is basically responding. We respond according to affinity or conditions and situations. And actually, okay, so I wanted to mention, because last week I think we talked about this, and I did say that, obviously it's not following, it's whatever I feel like it. Okay, so it's not my, okay, so, but also it doesn't mean necessarily that, depending on the conditions, right, we do need to, there's no like absolute say, we must follow. If let's say the affinity or the conditions, the situation is that everyone's gonna I don't know. Well, everyone's eating meat, okay, right now. Okay, so everyone's eating meat. So okay, so then we have to go along with that. So this is where it's not necessarily absolute in that sense that that's the conditions. So, but this is usually means that it should be enforced. Okay, that it's following the general. The conditions. So it's based, whatever is appropriate based on the conditions. Now, you might say, well, when, right, there's a saying, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. That's generally true, like, especially when you talk about like the laws. Maybe the some of the customs, right? Certainly, you don't want to do things that might offend people without you knowing it. I mean, it's maybe the custom in one culture might actually offend someone else in a different culture. So we have to, this is where we have to follow the affinity in wherever we are. But there could be, like, you can say, conflicts. Let's say, if I'm a vegetarian, then and people around me are all eating meat, well, does that mean I should eat meat with them? No. I mean, that's that's where because then you can say that our our vow, I guess, to being a vegetarian, that overrides it. Okay, so but obviously we don't want to make a big fuss over it, situation like that, right? Okay. And so, in doing all this, right, so we want to inspire the mind of the bodhicitta, which is you can say is the awakened mind, the mind that's mind of compassion, the mind, the mind of the Buddhas, right? It's selfless compassion and desire to relieve the suffering of sentient beings as well. Okay, so it's not just for our own sake that we want to relieve our own suffering, but the bodhicitta is the mind where we want to also relieve the suffering of all sentient beings. Okay, so I mean, it's obviously we there's always the self aspect in terms of we're trying to cultivate ourselves, so we want to, but eventually we bring out this bodhicitta, this mind. It may not be like 100% all at once, but it gradually, as we cultivate and we refine ourselves, that we get to that point where then that's really it's the Buddha, okay, the Bodhisattva, that there's no longer any self, and it's all about trying to relieve the suffering of sentient beings. Okay. All right, let's see. Yeah, okay, so I'm going to stop this here, and we'll continue next week. Yeah, I don't want to go into overtime. Yeah, I think we've been going overtime a lot lately. So, all right. So today is basically, it was basically kind of a review of the stuff that we've talked about in the past already, and about we have to. But we have to get to the root of the issue. We have to understand the human mind, heart and mind, and to know how to address it. And because that's really where it is. I mean, that's where you can say the battle is fought. I mean, that's where the cultivation is done. It's in the heart and mind. Okay. Obviously, there's the external stuff, but that's kind of that comes with it. I mean, when we're working on cultivating the internal, the heart and mind, the external cultivation will kind of flow from that. Okay, so if I had said anything wrong or did not explain things very well, made any mistakes, I asked the Buddhas for forgiveness, and also I asked transmitting masters and lecturers for their corrections. Thank you.